major conflict between GDPR and other human rights, such as the right to free speech, which the European Court of Human Rights and the United States typically enforce. And I strongly suspect when push comes to shove, the difference between the right to control your own data and the right to free speech will get resolved in favor of the right to free speech. But who knows?
So, but the GDPR does not really restrict that right. It makes customer voice heard by the bigger corporations. So this is in principle, it does not really, in essence, restrict it in any sense, because it's between the consumer and a business who is providing some service.
I would say something about somebody that's publicly available. The right to free speech says I can. If the customer says that they provided that data, the right to free speech says do that.
Well, there is legitimate purpose and public interest also in GDPR that kind of deals with this situation. So it's not that you purchase something, some mechanical device, let's say, and you ask, oh, delete all the transactions, and then you sue company for, I don't know, for not giving support, right? So there is a reasonable mechanism in place where you cannot just go and ask, oh, but delete everything. Like, you know, if you made a financial transaction, it has to be stored by regulations for some time as well. So this cannot be deleted. If the information is of public interest and your magazine publish somebody's name, it's also probably is fall under the GDPR's public interest clause. So it does not impact. It's taken into consideration, but I would advise to contact attorney for specific details. And this is not advice legal in any case.
After your first slide, if I were the lawyer, I would think I could have slide.
I thought this would bring also the amount of work actually that all our companies, particularly US companies that are working with Europe, have to expect and plan. For example, let's say Google or any other large company, every company has a website, and they're collecting data from different countries. So if you're working with Europe, you have European customers, and just you as a customer don't allow that from your IP, from your computer, just anything goes to data analytics tool. For example, there's so many businesses that are collecting money, earning money on a pay-per-click or any click. From the customer. So this means actually doing your whole code, that collects this information. Because, just using Google Analytics is norm, today. You really want to know how to target certain markets in order to see where your products are working or not, So if you just go back and look at everything that you have to get consent, or to change your script in a sense, say, I really have to have permission to collect this click from this IP address. It's a huge amount of work. Like software could be at one point.
Yeah, I mean, this and technological undertaking is not sufficient even. You need to have mechanisms, because now you have somebody in marketing buys a service and like, oh, let's do this analysis and do A/B testing on website. But now data privacy officer needs to know about it, and kind of somebody has to implement the mechanism of engaging with customer. And this cycle needs to be a living organism within a company, because change in technology impacts change how you comply. So you cannot suddenly start changing databases without talking with data privacy officer or somebody responsible, or changing consent, or just like, for fun starting gathering more data for customer for debugging even, So it's...
But HIPAA compliance, for example, when you go to the hospital, you have to sign a form, if you want to disclose your information to be used for research or something. So I'm guessing that besides paying the fees, which probably very rich companies can do, pay the fees to keep their business
Mm.
You will probably be, as customers will get, I mean, if I want to use Google, I will have to sign a form, just Google can collect my data, or, so it is kind of really, I believe that being creative, how we are here, probably something can be found out to just go around certain things, or just create content, in a small print, if you want to use my product.
Well, but that is not, that is actually explicitly addressed with regulations about small print. So it's not enough and it's breaking the compliance. So they thought about all the creativities. But on the other hand, it's not really hard once you have mechanism in place to like, okay, if customer does not want this to share this data, it's either I cannot provide the service or they get to degraded version of service. Like for example, if on websites you add Facebook feeds, you add maybe YouTube feeds and so on. This is to enhance the user experience. You do collection of some data because you want to give relevant ads. So as a consumer, I don't want to see, I don't know, for example, diapers today, like because I don't need them, or like baby products. So I would actually opt in rather to give me something relevant information. And you have, on the other hand, you have already magazines that instead of funding, or websites, instead of funding through the ads, they fund it through the paywall. So they remove whole tracking and they remove kind of ads and targeting because they find different business model. But it's definitely, I totally agree, this tremendous work needs to be done like yesterday in order to become compliant. Yes? Okay. About what? Portability, yeah.
Who's going to enforce that? Or are they going to come up with new standards?
So enforcing us with any data subject rights that the company have 30 days to provide it. For now, I think you have open standards for data portability like JSON or XML are widely accepted as portability of data. But in the end, what it will mean, I am not sure. It's still there is no format that says this has to look like in some particular way. So in portability, it's more that you can download your data as well, and like it has to be in some non-proprietary format that you can import it somewhere else.
A lot of smaller companies will be making formats that work well with the bigger companies.
But who's going to say that is portable or not?
If eventually somebody will complain us normally, and that will complain end up in some regulatory court, and that will be a decision on that. I think it's how, maybe, I don't know.
How does GDPR apply to the mass data that's already been collected?
Oh, that's a good question. In some cases, you cannot use it if you collected it without consent. So ad businesses are very, very unhappy with the situation because you need to have explicit consent for purpose. So there is.
Basically, when they complain, and it's going to be shown that you don't have consent. So basically, what we hear from our board advisor, who's IAPP, on the board of the IAPP, he basically says when complaints are going to drive a lot of the fines, not necessarily hunting after specific companies. And in that case, yeah. So.
I apologize for interrupting this, but I mean, it seems like everybody and their uncle is collecting data to resell it.
Yeah.
Even companies that are supposedly collecting it just for their own information to give you a better experience, they're just selling it on. How do you deal with that?
Well, I'm not sure if you can put it in the consent that I will resell your data, maybe. But I mean, a lot of companies collect data for legitimate purpose. I still want to believe in that. I think they had a reasoning in many cases just too complicated to deal with that, and it was postponed for like 3 decades. And now it's just time to kind of to go and clean up the mess and kind of consider, because you have all complications with this massive amount also. In some cases it's very good to have it, but in others, like, well, why do you even need it? Paying for storage, electricity, maintenance, IT personnel, just like, you know, do you really need it? So it will just force companies to think through about the data as a resource, because collecting more will cost more, because you need to have compliance, you need to have people, you need to have engagement. So you just simply will become a resource like, you know, electricity would just not burn through it. We're kind of mindful about it as well.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for introducing me to GDPR, which I have no idea what it was. I ran into issues 2010 with electric meter smart meters, and worked with the majority public utility companies. And of course, back to John's question about sanitized data, since it's not sanitized with fine. PGE actually was like a raw data. That's the problem. It's like sugar and flour and egg, right? There's IP knowledge needed to make a cake.
Yeah.
So just having sugar and flour doesn't do anything. Which also points out that it is very domain specific. So I'm wondering if there are ways to guide some users, some influence, before we get barred from producing value. That's what we do.
Mm.
Is there some groups, some lobbyists that we need to pay attention to before we get kind of handcuffed before even doing anything else?
So each of the both rights and responsibilities, they have working groups that publish kind of guidelines how it has to be done, or more specifically. And I think with the website I mentioned, IAPP is kind of good source of information what is going on there. And I agree with you that there is value in the data. It just will need to change according to regulation to how we deal with it. And they make it very clear who is owner of the data. So there is no doubt about that. You know, if you have a meter and collecting my data, it's not somebody else. Oh, yeah, I can give you the address afterwards. And it was in slide somewhere. Yes.
So I'm sorry I had to step out and you may have covered this issue, but in law there's a concept called force majeure. And up there you said we have a shortage of 75,000 ETOs, right? And what somebody would basically say is, I can't hire them, right? There's just not, I mean, I can't pay $850 an hour and expect my business to survive, right? So they're either telling me to go out of business, which has become the great big business gift, you know, to do this, right? Or you have to give me basically some kind of period where even though you gave me lots of warning, I didn't act fond enough, but I did act before the deadline, right? And so in that concept, there's going to be this period. It might last a week, it might last a month, where sort of like the number of DPOs equals the demand for DPOs, and then you have no excuse for not. So how long do you expect there to be a shortage of DPOs?
I don't know. That is a very good point and question. And I think with regard to this grace period or what it could be called, I mean, the companies need to start doing that. So if something happened and you say, well, I could not afford, so I just like, you know, did not dealt with that, I think that is questionable reason to address it.
So you do understand, and the people who wrote these regulations do understand that there will be disparate impact on big companies versus small companies, and that if you have sharp enforcement, all the small companies will work out.
Well, to be frank with that, you know, the regulation came out with warnings and regulations actually 2 years ago. So it's not came this Christmas. Even if it feels like that in magazines, in newspapers, it has been out there for 2 years about. And the talks about the unifying privacy rules have been even for longer going on. It's just that nobody paid attention, and now the deadline is coming, and well, and I personally believe that this deadline is not the end. It's just the beginning how companies need to start operating, because being compliant with privacy and these regulations means work every day change the way you operate it. And I mean, it impacts differently, but also scale is different. It's easier for smaller company to kind of to understand how we operate it and make it by design private and secure. Like, you know, I think it can be easier than having tens of thousands of people and you have data assets that you have no idea where they are. Right?
Yeah, I think you're spot on though. I think a lot of, and this is just my opinion right now, I think a lot of larger companies can afford to revamp operations. I think smaller companies, I think smaller companies are going to be a little bit more challenged with it. That's one of the reasons why we started the company. But you're spot on.
Yes, thank you. One last question. Thank you. The question was about, I think we kind of touched on it very early on, but we never really covered definitive on it. So most of what we covered was related to individuals. So when we're collecting information about companies, is there a different angle on it? Is there a different kind of viewpoint?
So in a sense, when you're doing business with the companies, there's always people involved. You have an email of person who is you contacting and so on. And with that regards, I'm not really clear, is it fall under contractual? But in many cases, if you and me are speaking, and I am from Europe, let's say, so you collecting my data in a sense, even if it's you have legitimate business purpose, right? So I am not 100% sure if I can exercise all my rights, but under some concept, you have to be able to store and keep track of our conversations for legitimate purpose because we engage in business. So there is an opening in a law which allows you to collect all this information which has legitimate business purpose. And this is coming back to kind of to understanding your operation and identifying what data you collected, where you store it, and why. Kind of it's going back to the process inside the organization to being able to motivate this.
So just so I'm clear that it's not really a cut and dry, you know, if you're a supplier to another company, you don't have to worry about GDPR at all.
I would say if you have customers in Europe, companies, I think you definitely should worry about it because they will be asking for that. And if your product will not have compliance feature, they will find another ones who will. This is my personal opinion because nobody wants to have a vendor that is not compliant. So because as controller, I am responsible for whom I am hiring. So if you produce a product and have European customers, you definitely should look into GDPR and how to become compliant. So thank you for all listening. That's amazing.